The history of glass-making can be traced back to 3500 BC in Mesopotamia. But Mesopotamians may have created second-rate copies of glass objects from Egypt, where this complex craft actually originated. Other archaeological evidence suggests that the first true glass was made in coastal North Syria, Mesopotamia or Egypt. The earliest known glass objects of the mid-2nd millennium BC were beads, perhaps initially created as accidental byproducts of metalworking, slags, or during the production of faience, a pre-glass vitreous material made by a process similar to glazing. Glass remained a luxury material, and the disasters that overtook late Bronze Age civilizations seem to have brought glass-making to a halt. Indigenous development of glass technology in South Asia may have begun in 1730 BC. In ancient China, though, glass-making seems to have a late start, compared to ceramics and metal work. In the Roman Empire, glass objects have been recovered across the Roman Empire in domestic, industrial and funerary contexts. Anglo-Saxon glass has been found across England during archaeological excavations of both settlement and cemetery sites. Glass in the Anglo-Saxon period was used in the manufacture of a range of objects including vessels, beads, windows, and was even used in jewelry. Origins: naturally occurring glass, especially the volcanic glass obsidian, has been used by many Stone Age societies across the globe for the production of sharp cutting tools and, due to its limited source areas, was extensively traded. But in general, archaeological evidence suggests that the first true glass was made in coastal North Syria, Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt. Because of Egypt's favorable environment for preservation, the majority of well-studied early glass is found there, although some of this is likely to have been imported. The earliest known glass objects of the mid-3rd millennium BC were beads, perhaps initially created as accidental byproducts of metalworking, slags, or during the production of faience, a pre-glass vitreous material made by a process similar to glazing. During the Late Bronze Age in Egypt, e.g., the Overtook treasure, and Western Asia, e.g., Megiddo, there was a rapid growth in glass-making technology. Archaeological finds from this period include colored glass ingots, vessels, often colored and shaped in imitation of highly prized hard stone carvings in semi-precious stones, and the ubiquitous beads. The alkali of Syrian and Egyptian glass was soda ash, sodium carbonate, which can be extracted from the ashes of many plants, notably halophile seashore plants. See saltwort. The earliest vessels were core-formed, produced by winding a ductile rope of glass round a shaped core of sand and clay over a metal rod, then fusing it with repeated reheatings. Threads of thin glass of different colors made with admixtures of oxides were subsequently wound around these to create patterns, which could be drawn into festoons by using metal raking tools. The vessel would then be rolled smooth, marvered, on a slab in order to press the decorative threads into its body. Handles and feet were applied separately. The rod was subsequently allowed to cool as the glass slowly annealed and was eventually removed from the center of the vessel, after which the core material was scraped out. Glass shapes for inlays were also often created in molds. Much early glass production, however, relied on grinding techniques borrowed from stoneworking. This meant that the glass was ground and carved in a cold state. By the 15th century BC, extensive glass production was occurring in Western Asia, Crete and Egypt, and the Mycenaean Greek term kuano okoi, meaning workers of lapis lazuli and glass, written in Linear B syllabic script, is attested. It is thought the techniques and recipes required for the initial fusing of glass from raw materials was a closely guarded technological secret reserved for the large palace industries of powerful states. Glassworkers in other areas therefore relied on imports of preformed glass, often in the form of cast ingots such as those found on the Ulu-Burun shipwreck off the coast of modern Turkey. Glass remained a luxury material, and the disasters that overtook late Bronze Age civilizations seem to have brought glassmaking to a halt. It picked up again in its former sites, in Syria and Cyprus, in the 9th century BC, when the techniques for making colorless glass were discovered. The first glassmaking manual dates back to ca. 650 BC. Instructions on how to make glass are contained in cuneiform tablets discovered in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. In Egypt, glassmaking did not revive until it was reintroduced in Ptolemaic Alexandria. Core-formed vessels and beads were still widely produced, but other techniques came to the fore with experimentation and technological advancements. During the Hellenistic period, many new techniques of glass production were introduced and glass began to be used to make larger pieces, notably tablewares. Techniques developed during this period include slumping, viscous, but not fully molten, glass over a mold in order to form a dish, and millefiori, meaning thousand flowers, technique, where canes of multicolored glass were sliced and the slices arranged together and fused in a mold to create a mosaic-like effect. It was also during this period that colorless or decolored glass began to be prized, and methods for achieving this effect were investigated more fully. According to Pliny the Elder, Phoenician traders were the first to stumble upon glass manufacturing techniques at the site of the Belus River. Georgius Agricola, in De Re Metallica, reported a traditional serendipitous discovery tale of familiar type. The tradition is that a merchant ship laden with nitrum being moored at this place, the merchants were preparing their meal on the beach, and not having stones to prop up their pots, they used lumps of nitrum from the ship, which fused and mixed with the sands of the shore, and there flowed streams of a new translucent liquid, and thus was the origin of glass. Quote, "This account is more a reflection of Roman experience of glass production. However, as white silica sand from this area was used in the production of glass within the Roman Empire, due to its high purity levels. During the 1st century BC, glassblowing was discovered on the Syro-Judean coast, revolutionizing the industry. Glass vessels were now inexpensive compared to pottery vessels. A growth of the use of glass products occurred throughout the Roman world. Glass became the Roman plastic, and glass containers produced in Alexandria spread throughout the Roman Empire. With the discovery of clear glass, through the introduction of manganese dioxide, by glass blowers in Alexandria circa 100 AD, the Romans began to use glass for architectural purposes. Cast glass windows, albeit with poor optical qualities, began to appear in the most important buildings in Rome and the most luxurious villas of Herculaneum and Pompeii. Over the next 1,000 years, glassmaking and working continued and spread through southern Europe and beyond. History by culture. India. Indigenous development of glass technology in South Asia may have begun in 1730 BC. Evidence of this culture includes a red-brown glass bead along with a hoard of beads dating to that period, making it the earliest attested glass from the Indus Valley locations. Glass discovered from later sites dating from 600 to 300 BC displays common colors. Chalcolithic evidence of glass has been found in Hastinapur, India. Some of the texts which mention glass in India are the Shatapal, the Brahmana and Vinaya Pitaka. However, the first unmistakable evidence in large quantities, dating from the 3rd century BC, has been uncovered from the archaeological site in Takshashila, Pakistan. with bangles, beads, small vessels, and tiles discovered in quantity. By the 1st century AD, glass was being used for ornaments and casing in South Asia. Contact with the Greco-Roman world added newer techniques, and Indian artisans mastered several techniques of glass molding, decorating and coloring by the succeeding centuries. The Satavahana period of India also produced short cylinders of composite glass, including those displaying a lemon-yellow matrix covered with green glass. China. In Chinese history, glass played a peripheral role in the arts and crafts. When compared to ceramics and metal work, the limited archaeological distribution and use of glass objects are evidence of the rarity of the material. Literary sources date the first manufacture of glass to the 5th century AD. However, the earliest archaeological evidence for glass manufacture in China comes from the late Zhou dynasty, 1046 BC to 221 BC. Chinese learned to manufacture glass comparably later than the Mesopotamians, Egyptians and Indians. Imported glass objects first reached China during the late spring and autumn period, early Warring States period, early 5th century BC, in the form of polychrome beads. These imports created the impetus for the production of indigenous glass beads. During the Han period, 206 BC to 220 AD, the use of glass diversified. The introduction of glass casting in this period encouraged the production of molded objects, such as discs and other ritual objects. The Chinese glass objects from the Warring States period and Han Dynasty vary greatly in chemical composition from the imported glass objects. The glasses from this period contain high levels of barium oxide, Bao, and lead, distinguishing them from the soda-lime silica glasses of Western Asia and Mesopotamia. At the end of the Han Dynasty, AD 220, the lead barium glass tradition declined, with glass production only resuming during the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Romans. Glass objects have been recovered across the Roman Empire in domestic, industrial and funerary contexts. Glass was used primarily for the production of vessels, although mosaic tiles and window glass were also produced. Roman glass production developed from Hellenistic technical traditions, initially concentrating on the production of intensely colored cast glass vessels. However, during the 1st century AD, the industry underwent rapid technical growth that saw the introduction of glass blowing and the dominance of colorless or aqua glasses. Production of raw glass was undertaken in geographically separate locations to the working of glass into finished vessels, and by the end of the 1st century AD, large-scale manufacturing, primarily in Alexandria, resulted in the establishment of glass as a commonly available material in the Roman world. Islamic world. Islamic glass continued the achievements of pre-Islamic cultures, especially the Sasanian glass of Persia. The Arab poet al-Burturi, 822–897, described the clarity of such glass. Its color hides the glass as if it is standing in it without a container. In the 8th century, the Persian chemist Jabir ibn Hayyan Geber described 46 recipes for producing colored glass in Kitab al-Durr al-Maknuna, the Book of the Hidden Pearl, in addition to 12 recipes inserted by al-Marrakeshi in a later edition of the book. By the 11th century, clear glass mirrors were being produced in Arab Islamic Spain. Medieval Europe. The Roman tradition of very fine glassmaking did not continue in the Middle Ages, and Anglo-Saxon glass and other regional traditions were mainly functional pieces, mostly somewhat crude forest glass. The claw beaker was popular as a relatively easy-to-make but impressive vessel that exploited the unique potential of glass. Only at the end of the period did European glass vessels once again become very fine in quality. imitating those imported from the Islamic world. Glass objects from the 7th and 8th centuries have been found on the island of Torcello near Venice. These form an important link between Roman times and the later importance of that city in the production of the material. Around 1000 AD, an important technical breakthrough was made in Northern Europe when soda glass, produced from white pebbles and burnt vegetation, was replaced by glass made from a much more readily available material, potash obtained from wood ashes. From this point on, northern glass differed significantly from the made in the Mediterranean area, where soda remained in common use. Until the 12th century, stained glass to which metallic or other impurities had been added for coloring, was not widely used, but it rapidly became an important medium for Romanesque art and especially Gothic art. Almost all survivals are in church buildings, but it was also used in grand secular buildings. The 11th century saw the emergence in Germany of new ways of making sheet glass by blowing spheres. The spheres were swung out to form cylinders and then cut while still hot, after which the sheets were flattened. This technique was perfected in 13th century Venice. The crown glass process was used up to the mid-19th century. In this process, the glass blower would spin approximately 9 pounds, 4 kilograms, of molten glass at the end of a rod until it flattened into a disc approximately 5 feet, 1.5 meters, in diameter. The disc would then be cut into panes. Domestic glass vessels in late medieval Northern Europe are known as forest glass. Anglo-Saxon World Anglo-Saxon glass has been found across England during archaeological excavations of both settlement and cemetery sites. Glass in the Anglo-Saxon period was used in the manufacture of a range of objects including vessels, beads, windows, and was even used in jewelry. In the 5th century AD, with the Roman departure from Britain, there were also considerable changes in the usage of glass. Excavation of Murano British sites have revealed plentiful amounts of glass, but, in contrast, the amount recovered from 5th century and later Anglo-Saxon sites is minuscule. The majority of complete vessels and assemblages of beads come from the excavations of early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries, but a change in burial rites in the late 7th century affected the recovery of glass, as Christian Anglo-Saxons were buried with fewer grave goods, and glass is rarely found. From the late 7th century onwards, window glass is found more frequently. This is directly related to the introduction of Christianity and the construction of churches and monasteries. There are a few Anglo-Saxon ecclesiastical literary sources that mention the production and use of glass, although these relate to window glass used in ecclesiastical buildings. Glass was also used by the Anglo-Saxons in the jewelry, both as enamel or as cut glass insets. Murano The center for luxury Italian glassmaking from the 14th century was the island of Murano, which developed many new techniques and became the center of a lucrative export trade in dinnerware, mirrors, and other items. What made Venetian Murano glass significantly different was that the local quartz pebbles were almost pure silica, and were ground into a fine clear sand that was combined with soda ash obtained from the Levant, for which the Venetians held the sole monopoly. The clearest and finest glass is tinted in two ways. Firstly, a natural coloring agent is ground and melted with the glass. Many of these coloring agents still exist today. For a list of coloring agents, see below. Black glass was called obsidianis after obsidian stone. A second method is apparently to produce a black glass which, when held to the light, will show the true color that this glass will give to another glass when used as a dye. The Venetian ability to produce this superior form of glass resulted in a trade advantage over other glass-producing lands. Murano's reputation as a center for glass-making was born when the Venetian Republic, fearing fire might burn down the city's mostly wood buildings, ordered glassmakers to move their foundries to Murano in 1291. Murano's glassmakers were soon the island's most prominent citizens. Glassmakers were not allowed to leave the Republic. Many took a risk and set up glass furnaces in surrounding cities and as far afield as England and the Netherlands. Bohemia Bohemian glass, or Bohemia crystal, is a decorative glass produced in regions of Bohemia and Silesia, now in the current state of the Czech Republic. Since the 13th century, oldest archaeology excavations of glass-making sites date to around 1250 and are located in the Lusatian Mountains of northern Bohemia. Most notable sites of glass-making throughout the ages are Skalis, German, Langenau, Kamieniki Senov, German, Steinschornau, and Novi Bor, German, Hader. Both Novi Bor and Kamieniki Senov have their own glass museums with many items dating since around 1600. It was especially outstanding in its manufacture of glass in high Baroque style from 1685 to 1750. In the 17th century, Caspar Lehmann, gem cutter to Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, adapted to glass the technique of gem engraving with copper and bronze wheels. Modern glass production. New processes. A very important advance in glass manufacture was the technique of adding lead oxide to the molten glass. This improved the appearance of the glass and made it easier to melt using sea coal as a furnace fuel. This technique also increased the working period of the glass, making it easier to manipulate. The process was first discovered by Georg Ravenscraft in 1674, who was the first to produce clear lead crystal glassware on an industrial scale. Ravenscraft had the cultural and financial resources necessary to revolutionize the glass trade, allowing England to overtake Venice as the center of the glass industry in the 18th and 19th centuries. Seeking to find an alternative to Venetian cristallo, he used flint as a silica source, but his glasses tended to cristle, developing a network of small cracks destroying its transparency. This was eventually overcome by replacing some of the potash flux with lead oxide to the melt. He was granted a protective patent in 1673. Where production and refinement moved from his glasshouse on the Savoy to the seclusion of Henley-on-Thames. By 1696, after the patent expired, 27 glasshouses in England were producing flint glass and were exporting all over Europe, with such success that, in 1746, the British government imposed a lucrative tax on it. Rather than drastically reduce the lead content of their glass, manufacturers responded by creating highly decorated, smaller, more delicate forms, often with hollow stems, known to collectors today as excise glasses. The British glass-making industry was able to take off with the repeal of the tax in 1845. Evidence of the use of the blown plate glass method dates back to 1620 in London and was used for mirrors and coach plates. Louis Lucas de Nehoune Thevet perfected the process of casting polished plate glass in 1688 in France. Prior to this invention, mirror plates, made from blown sheet glass, had been limited in size. Denehou's process of rolling molten glass poured on an iron table rendered the manufacture of very large plates possible. This method of production was adopted by the English in 1773 at Ravenhead. The polishing process was industrialized around 1800 with the adoption of a steam engine to carry out the grinding and polishing of the cast glass. Industrial production. The use of glass as a building material was heralded by the Crystal Palace of 1851, built by Joseph Paxton to house the Great Exhibition. Paxton's revolutionary new building inspired the public use of glass as a material for domestic and horticultural architecture. The requisite technology for the construction of plate glass had been made possible just a few years earlier by James Hartley, working for the firm Chance Brothers. In 1832, Chance Brothers became the first company to adopt the cylinder method to produce sheet glass with the expertise of Georges Bontemps, a famous French glass maker. The glass was taken from the furnace in large iron ladles and thrown upon a cast iron bed of a rolling table, where it is rolled into a sheet with an iron roller. The sheet, still soft, was pushed into the open mouth of an annealing tunnel, a temperature-controlled oven called a lair, down which it was carried by a system of rollers. Hartley introduced the rolled plate method in 1847. This allowed a ribbed finish and was often used for extensive glass roofs such as within railway stations. An early advance in automating glass manufacturing was patented in 1848 by the engineer Henry Bessemer. His system produced a continuous ribbon of flat glass by forming the ribbon between rollers. This was an expensive process, as the surfaces of the glass needed polishing. Bessemer also introduced an early form of float glass in 1843, which involved pouring glass onto liquid tin. The mass production of glass was developed in 1887 by the firm Ashley in Castleford, Yorkshire. This semi-automatic process used machines that were capable of producing 200 standardized bottles per hour, many times quicker than the traditional methods of manufacture. Chance Brothers also introduced the machine-rolled pattern glass method in 1888. In 1898, Pilkington invented wired cast glass, where the glass incorporates a strong steel wire mesh for safety and security. This was commonly given the misnomer Georgian wired glass, but it greatly postdates the Georgian era. The machine-drawn cylinder technique was invented in the USA and was the first mechanical method for the drawing of window glass. It was manufactured under license in the UK by Pilkington from 1910 onwards. The polished plate process was improved by Pilkington in 1938 and incorporated a double grinding process to give an improved quality to the finish. Between 1953 and 1957, Sir Alistair Pilkington and Kenneth Bickerstaff of the UK's Pilkington Brothers developed the revolutionary float glass process, the first successful commercial application for forming a continuous ribbon of glass using a molten tin bath on which the molten glass flows unhindered under the influence of gravity. This method gave the sheet uniform thickness and very flat surfaces. Modern windows are made from float glass. Most float glass is soda lime glass, but relatively minor quantities of specialty borosilicate and flat panel display glass are also produced using the float glass process. The success of this process lay in the careful balance of the volume of glass fed onto the bath, where it was flattened by its own weight. Full-scale profitable sales of float glass were first achieved in 1960. Notes and references. Notes. References. Further reading. Carboni, Stefano. Whitehouse, David. 2001. Glass of the Sultans. New York. The Metropolitan Museum of Art. ISBN 0870999869.